Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And my name is Cik Muhammad Firdaus bin Cik Harun. My matric number is 262015. And now I would like to present my presentation about Doctrine of Separation of Power in Malaysia for my individual assignment. And this is my first slide, and we begin with next slide. Now, first of all, we need to know the meaning of doctrine. And doctrine is a principle of position of the body of principles in branch of knowledge or system of belief. That means the doctrine is the way how the government govern and how the country works. And for Malaysia, Malaysia is a parliamentary democratic country with constitutional monarchy that implemented the Westminster system from the British. And the system of Westminster is taken from British since the independence of Malaya in 1957. And after that, we use the Westminster system, the constitutional monarchy, and parliamentary democratic. And Malaysia, we have Yang di-Pertuan Agong or YDPA as our head of state. That means our first ruler is YDPA that been chosen among 9 rulers of Malay, or in bahasa Malaysia 9 Raja Tanah Melayu. And the YDPA is chosen after 5 years, and after using the Majlis Raja-Raja, and they will choose among the rulers, and one rulers will be chosen for 5 years administration. And the doctrine separation of power or branch of government, we have executive, legislative, and judiciary. And these 3 branch of government are separated among each other. And the separation of power comes from our federal constitution, from the Article 39 that stated the executive authority of the Federation shall be vested in the Yang di-Pertuan Agong and exercisable subject to the provision of any federal law and of the second schedule by him or by the cabinet or any minister authorized by the cabinet. But Parliament may by law confer executive function on other persons. That means the executive are different between legislative or judiciary. And yes, our head of state is Yang di-Pertuan Agong, but our head of executive is our Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister will lead the cabinet and minister in the parliament. Therefore, I will explain further in my next slide. First of all, we need to know where the idea the separation of power comes from. And for this time, I will try to explain and try to bring tell about the idea separation of power that comes from the West perspective. And we know that the one of most famous public figure that speak or give the idea about separation of power in modern era is come from the France public figure Montesquieu. However, the idea separation of power is actually come earlier than him, before him, which is the first person that spoke about the separation of power is come from the Plato, and that he tell that the separation of power is important because it is to keep the elites from manhandling their power or abuse their power, and therefore we need separation of power to avoid the absolutism from the authorized body. And after him, after Plato, we have Aristotle that comes further and spoke more deeper about separation of power. And the Aristotle idea can be found from his book named or topic by Politics, which is he divides power into three main bodies only, which is namely legislation, governance or execution, and justice. Therefore, the idea of Plato is bring by Aristotle, and he thought much deeper from his perspective. And after Aristotle, we have another public figure such as John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and all of the idea is same, which is they speak about the separation of power, and they say that we need to separate the power because we want to avoid the absolutism and avoid the manhandling power, same with the idea of Plato. Next, now we will take the power separation from Islamic perspective. Since the Article 3(1) in the Federal Constitution state that Islam is the religion of the Federation, which means the official religion in Malaysia is Islam. Therefore, we need to take the perspective from Islam about power separation. And the Islamic scholars that tells or speak about the power separation is like Sulaiman Al-Tamawi, Mahmud Al-Hilmi, Zafir Al-Qasimi, Abdul Hamid Al-Mutawali, which is they have speak and thought about the power separation. And the Islamic scholars have named another name from Arabic, which is Al-Sulta Al-Tashri'iyah for legislative body, or Al-Sulta Al-Tafindiyah for executive body, and Al-Sulta Al-Qadaiyah for judiciary body. And one of Islamic scholars, such as Sulaiman Tamawi, he argues that the Islamic legislator is always bound by the ruling of the text of the Quran and Sunnah. And the difference between Islamic and West perspective, one of the most important difference is Islamic scholars state that the power separation must be related with the Quran and Al-Sunnah. Therefore, it is to ensure that the country or the government be governed by the right and correct way according to the Al-Quran and Al-Sunnah. And we cannot just simply using our head or our idea freely, but we need to relate it with the guide of Al-Quran and Hadith to ensure that we are not in wrong path or way, especially to make the important decision for the country. And that is one of the most different between West perspective and Islamic perspective for power separation. Now, the bodies of separation in Malaysia. Did you know that Malaysia is one of the most unique country in the world? Why? Because we have the YDPA position. which is the YDPA role as a head of state. But the position of YDPA is chosen by the 9 rulers of Malay for 5-year period. It is different with other countries like Thailand or Brunei or United Kingdom that only have one king or queen for their country. But Malaysia have so many rulers, therefore they need to choose for in period of 5 years. And the Article 39 in Federal Constitution state that YDPA is a head of state but not a head of executive, because the authority of executive is belong to cabinet or minister that appointed by YDPA. Therefore, YDPA need to appoint a prime minister and cabinet or minister in the parliament to govern or to manage the executive body. Therefore, in appointing a prime minister, the YDPA must be ensure that the appointed individuals gain the trust of the majority of the in the Dewan Rakyat in parliament. And YDPA, the prime minister must have a majority support from all the members of parliament. And in our federation state that when the prime minister resigns, all the members of his cabinet will also be dismantled, which is if the prime minister resigns, all the position in cabinet also be resigned automatically. Therefore, in federal constitution also state that one of the absolute power for YDPA is just to approving declaration of emergency, or in bahasa Malaysia darurat. And Article 150 of the Federation state that YDPA have to be satisfied with security of economic life of the people can declare about the emergency. However, if the Prime Minister advise for emergency, therefore YDPA can listen and can also not to listen from the advice of Prime Minister. Therefore, the executive body in Malaysia is led by Prime Minister that help from the cabinet or minister in the parliament in the Dewan Rakyat. Therefore, the YDPA is the head of state, but the head of state is Prime Minister and all the cabinet in parliament. We go to the legislative bodies. And the legislative means having the power of performing the function of legislating, which is in the Article 44 until 68 in Federal Institution state about the legislative power. And in Malaysia, the parliament is divided into two Dewan, which is Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara, to perform the legislative power. And in the Dewan Rakyat, we have 222 seats of member of parliament that are selected by general election by people in 5 years. For the Dewan Rakyat and member of parliament are from the politicians that in the general election. And next we have Dewan Negara that have 70 seats that being called Senate, and the members of Senate are called Senator that selected by YDPA and Adun or Ahli Dewan Undangan Negeri. So it is two different bodies, which is Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. And the Dewan Rakyat are in the parliament, which is where our members of parliament discuss and debates the bill before agreed by YDPA and being gazetted by YDPA. And the article I mentioned about the Article 44, the legislative authority of the Federation shall be vested in the Parliament, which shall consist of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong in two majlis, House of Parliament, to be known as Dewan Rakyat Senate, and Dewan Rakyat, which is House of Representatives. Therefore, the legislative will use the power and we bring the rule and be discussed in the parliament to govern the country by the cabinet, by the members of parliament and senator. And therefore, they will use the legislative power. And next is judiciary bodies, and means judiciary means a branch of government in which judicial power is vested, that the government about that work about the judiciary in a country. And we can found the articles 121 until 131A of the Federation stating that shall be two high courts equivalent to its jurisdiction. In Malaysia, we have two different courts that have inspected the upper court and the lower court. The upper court, there are three types of courts, namely the Federal Court, Court of Appeal, and the High Court of Malaya and Sabah Sarawak. Subsequently, at the lower court, there are four types of courts, namely the Sexual Criminal Court against children, courts for children, magistrate courts, and section courts. And this will separated with the upper court and the lower court are decided according to the rule and the situation of the case, and then the type of case that will decide either upper court or lower court will be discussed. And for now, the stage of type of court prescribed to hear the trial of the case is dependent on the type of offence committed and the sentence place of the offence. And the position and role of the Chief Justice is found in the Federal Constitution under Article 122(1). The Federal Court shall consist of a person President of the Court, nicknamed the Justice of the Federal Court. And currently, our Chief Justice is held by Yang Ahmad Arif Tan Sri Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, who was appointed on 2nd May 2019. Therefore, it is clear that Malaysia practices separation of power for judiciary body. Although the YDPA is in power, but its power is run by others acting under the provision of Constitution. Now, the comparison with other countries. As I stated before, Malaysia is a unique country. It is different with the other countries, such as Brunei, Singapore, and Indonesia. For Brunei, there are absolute monarchy governing their country, which is they have Sultan Hassanah Bolkiah as Sultan, and they implemented the absolute monarchy, and different with our country, which is our country is constitutional monarchy. And for Singapore and Indonesia, they are the republic country, as the head of their state is president, and they implemented the presidency country. And from these three countries, although they are the neighborhood of Malaysia, but it's a different system of government that implemented. However, Malaysia are different from their country, and from a perspective that Malaysia have a strong and most functional and systematic for govern the administration of the country. Power separation and democracy. As I've stated and I said it before, the Malaysia system are the best because Malaysia have a comprising various races requires a balanced freedom of democracy to ensure a peaceful and harmonious nation. Since we have the various of races such as Malay, Chinese and Indian, Malaysia requires a balanced freedom. We need to balance the democracy to ensure peaceful and to ensure that Malaysia are a successful country. Provisions is the key to a balance of power in a country, in particular Malaysia. The existence of parliament further strengthens the role of democracy, and because all the parties and can give their views and expression in the Dewan Rakyat through their selected MPs or members of parliament. And most of the countries that are peace are implemented the democracy system to create a peaceful and harmonious political situation. We can find that the countries like Malaysia, such as New Zealand, United Kingdom, Sweden, and the other countries, they have the democratic, therefore their country more peaceful. In conclusion, the separation of power between executive, legislative, and judicial body in Malaysia has enabled the country's administration to run smoothly and orderly. Separation of power should be defended by all parties to ensure that the country's democracy and stability are maintained. The highlight the constitution and practice the rukun negara is the key to shaping a successful Malaysia. Therefore, we as a Malaysian and we as a rakyat Malaysian need to defend the democracy and separation of power, and to ensure that separation of power always be implemented. We need to follow the rukun negara and mutual respect amongst each other, even we have different races or skin color.